Look at this trash. Money really can't buy class, can it? The manicured finger tapping aggressively on the hood of my rusted Ford pickup belonged to a woman wearing a light blue suit that probably cost more than the truck itself. Her voice carried that specific frequency reserved for people who have never been told no in their entire lives. A sharp, nasal tone that cut through the pristine silence of the lakeside morning like a bandsaw hitting a nail. She stood there, clutching a clipboard against her chest like a shield, staring at me with a mixture of disgust and triumphant pity. I didn't flinch. I didn't look angry. I just looked at the finger tapping my hood, then up at her face and then back to the notebook in my hand. To her, I was just some drifter, a vagrant who had inherited a rundown cabin that was dragging down her precious property values. She thought she was evicting a nuisance. She didn't know she was declaring war on the man who legally owned the ground beneath her Italian leather heels. In 48 hours, she would call the police on me. In 3 weeks, I would dismantle her entire empire piece by piece, brick by brick, lie by lie. But at that moment, I just turned the page of my notebook and noted the time. 7:15 a.m. "Are you deaf?" she snapped, stepping closer, her perfume wafting over me in a chemical cloud of lavender and entitlement. "I said you can't park this monstrosity here. This is a private road for residents of the reserve at Mirror Lake. The sheer visual pollution is a violation of Bylaw Section 4, Paragraph C." I capped my pen, sliding it into the breast pocket of my flannel shirt. I looked past her, toward the shimmering expanse of the lake that stretched out for miles, reflecting the towering pines and the snow-capped peaks in the distance. It was beautiful. It was silent. It was ancient. Section 4, Paragraph C, I repeated, my voice flat, calm. Visual nuisance. Right. Exactly, she said, her smile tight and predatory. "I'm Venetia Thorne Kessler, president of the Homeowners Association, and you have exactly 30 minutes to remove this vehicle and whatever debris you've unloaded, or I will have it towed at your expense. We don't tolerate blight here." I looked at the debris she was referencing. It wasn't trash. It was a laser micrometer, a high-density surveyor's theodolite, and a case of structural stress sensors. Tools of a trade she couldn't even pronounce, let alone understand. I was kneeling by the lake edge not to admire the view, but to examine a concrete pylon supporting the massive, multi-tiered luxury dock that extended from the clubhouse lawn. 30 minutes, I said. 29 now, she corrected, tapping her watch. Behind her, 2 men in matching polo shirts with community safety embroidered on the pockets stepped out of a white SUV, crossing their arms and trying to look intimidating. They looked like they spent more time polishing their sunglasses than training for conflict. I stood up, dusting the dirt from the knees of my work pants. I didn't argue. I didn't explain that I was a former Army Corps of Engineers structural specialist who had spent 20 years analyzing load-bearing stress on dams in war zones. I didn't tell her that I saw the world in stress points and breaking limits, and that right now, I was looking at a very big one. I just walked to the driver's side of my truck, opened the door, and climbed in. "Smart choice," Venetia called out, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "Don't come back without a contractor's license and a vehicle printed in this century." I started the engine. It rumbled to life with a cough of black smoke that made Venetia wrinkle her nose in disgust. I put it in gear and drove slowly up the gravel path toward the old cabin at the top of the ridge, the one my great-uncle Silas had left me. As I rolled away, I saw Venetia turn to her security guards, laughing, pointing at my truck. She thought she had won. She thought this was over. She had no idea that I wasn't retreating. I was simply moving to higher ground, to reload. The cabin was exactly as I remembered it from the summers I spent here as a kid, before life in the military took me away. It was rough-hewn timber, smelling of cedar and wood smoke, nestled into the tree line like it had grown there. It was small, dark, and utterly unimpressive compared to the glass and steel mansions that now lined the lakefront below. But it had something those houses didn't. It had history, and it had secrets. I spent the rest of the morning unpacking, not clothes, but equipment. I set up my workspace on the heavy oak table in the center of the room. My laptop, my satellite uplink, my maps. I wasn't here on vacation. I was here on a mission. Uncle Silas hadn't just died. He had sent me a letter 3 days before he passed. A letter that was short, cryptic, and written with a shaking hand. Mercer, they are pushing. They think I'm just a senile old man. They built on the water, Mercer. They took the flow. Check the box under the floorboards in the pantry. Don't sell. Don't give an inch. It's not just land. It's the water. I walked to the pantry. The floorboards were wide plank pine, worn smooth by generations of boots. I found the loose board Silas had mentioned, prying it up with the edge of a pry bar. Underneath, nestled in the insulation, was a metal lockbox. It was heavy, cold. I set it on the table and picked the lock with a tension wrench and a rake pick, a habit from a life spent getting into places I wasn't supposed to be. The lid popped open with a groan of rusted hinges. Inside there was no money, no gold, just papers, stacks of them, yellowed with age, smelling of mildew and time. I started reading, and as I read, the world outside the window, the luxury boats, the jet skis, the sprawling docks, began to look very different. At the bottom of the stack was a document that made my heart stop for a second. It wasn't a standard deed. It was a federal land patent form dated 1887. It bore the seal of the United States Department of the Interior, signed by a clerk whose handwriting was all loops and flourishes. It granted Silas Ashland's grandfather, my great-great-grandfather, not just the 20 acres on the ridge, but the sovereign waterway grant for the entirety of Mirror Lake and its primary tributaries. I read it again, then a third time. I pulled out my magnifying glass to check the seal. Authentic. In the late 19th century, water rights were everything. Men died for them. And this document didn't just give my family access to the lake. It gave us ownership of the lakebed, the water column, and the shoreline up to the high water mark. I looked out the window at Venetia's massive clubhouse dock, the one I had been inspecting earlier. According to this document, that dock wasn't built on HOA land. It was built on my land, and they were charging residents $5,000 a year in lake access fees for water they didn't own. I sat back in the creaking wooden chair, the silence of the cabin wrapping around me. This wasn't a property dispute. This was a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme operating in plain sight, and Venetia Thorne Kessler was the architect. I spent the next 3 hours digitizing the documents, uploading them to a secure cloud server. Never keep your only ammo in one bunker. That was rule number 1. Rule number 2 was to know the terrain. I took my drone case out to the porch. It was a high-end commercial survey drone, capable of creating topographical maps with millimeter accuracy. I launched it, the rotors buzzing like a swarm of angry hornets as it shot up into the blue sky. I flew it over the lake, mapping the shoreline. I captured high-resolution images of the retaining walls, the private beaches, the boathouses. On my tablet screen, I overlaid the property lines from the 1887 patent against the current satellite imagery. The red lines of my property didn't stop at the water's edge. They encompassed the entire lake. The HOA's property lines, marked in blue, stopped 50 feet from the water. Everything they had built, the marina, the floating swim platforms, the private beaches where they chased off locals, was squatting on my inheritance. I brought the drone back as the sun started to dip low, casting long shadows across the valley. I had the data. I had the proof. Now I needed to see how they would react to a little pressure. I walked down to the end of my driveway, where the gravel met the paved road of the subdivision. I didn't have to wait long. A white G-Wagon with gold rims came purring up the hill, blocking the entrance to my property. Venetia sat behind the wheel, her face hidden behind oversized sunglasses. She rolled down the window. "I thought I told you to clear out," she said, not bothering to look at me. She was typing something on her phone. "I live here," I said, leaning against my mailbox. "And you're blocking my driveway. That's a violation of the county traffic code, isn't it?" She laughed, a sharp barking sound. "This isn't a county road, honey. This is a private community road. We own it. And since your truck is still visible from the street, consider this your official citation." She held out a slip of paper. I didn't take it. She let it flutter to the ground. $500 fine. Unauthorized assessment of community property and visual blight, she recited. Payable immediately, or we put a lien on your shack. I looked at the paper in the dirt. Then I looked at her. "You can't build here," I said softly. "Excuse me?" She lowered her sunglasses, looking at me for the first time. "The dock," I said. "The one by the clubhouse. The pylons are showing stress fractures. You overloaded the load-bearing capacity when you added that second deck for the yacht club parties. It's not safe." Her eyes narrowed. "Are you threatening our property?" "I'm giving you a professional assessment, free of charge." "You're a mechanic with a loud truck," she sneered. "I have engineers, real ones. Now move your trash or I'll have the sheriff here to move you." She rolled up the window and reversed, her tires spinning on the gravel, spraying stones onto my boots. She sped off down the hill, leaving a cloud of dust and the scent of expensive exhaust. I picked up the citation. I folded it carefully into a paper airplane. I threw it toward the tree line. She thought she was applying pressure. She didn't know she was compressing a spring. I went back inside and made a phone call. Not to a tow truck, not to a contractor. I called the county surveyor's office. "This is Mercer Ashland," I said when the clerk answered. "I need to request an emergency boundary verification for parcel 419. Yes, the lakefront. I believe there's been a significant encroachment on a federally protected easement." The next morning, the sun was bright and cold. I was drinking coffee on the porch when I saw the county truck winding its way up the road. It wasn't the sheriff. It was a white pickup with the county seal on the door. A man in a high-visibility vest got out, carrying a tripod and a GPS rover. He looked tired but thorough. "Mr. Ashland?" he asked. "I'm Jim. You called about an encroachment?" "Morning, Jim," I said, walking down to meet him. "I did. I have reason to believe the new retaining wall the HOA put in last month is about 15 feet over the property line." Jim sighed, looking down at the cluster of luxury homes below. "Those HOA folks, they usually get what they want. Are you sure about this? Their maps are pretty detailed." "I'm sure," I said. "Check the 1887 markers. They're stone buried about 2 feet down. I flagged them for you." Jim raised an eyebrow. "You flagged century-old markers?" "I like history," I said. Jim set up his equipment. He spent an hour taking measurements, moving his tripod, and checking his data collector. I watched from the porch, drinking my coffee. Below us, I saw Venetia come out of her house. She spotted the county truck and froze. She pulled out her phone, making a call. Within minutes, she was marching up the hill, flanked by her 2 polo shirt security guards. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, storming up to Jim. "Who authorized this work? This is private property." Jim looked up from his eyepiece, unimpressed. "County surveyor, ma'am. Confirming boundaries. Public record request." "From whom?" she shrieked. "I demand to know who authorized this." Jim pointed a thumb at me. "Property owner, Mr. Ashland." Venetia spun around to face me. "You? You have no right to survey our land." "My land," I corrected. "I'm just checking to make sure you aren't lost." "This is harassment," she yelled. "I'm calling my lawyer. I'm calling the county commissioner. You're going to regret this, you little—" "Ma'am," Jim interrupted, his voice heavy with the weight of bad news. "You might want to hold off on that call." Venetia froze. "Excuse me?" Jim looked at his data collector, then at the retaining wall below, then back at Venetia. "According to the historical benchmarks, which match the federal patent Mr. Ashland provided, your entire private beach, the retaining wall, and about half of your pool deck are built on Mr. Ashland's parcel." Silence. Absolute, ringing silence. Even the birds seemed to stop singing. Venetia blinked. Her mouth opened, then closed. Her face went a shade of red that clashed violently with her light blue suit. That is nonsense," she hissed. "Our developers surveyed this land. We have titles. We have deeds." "You have deeds based on a 1980 subdivision map," Jim said, shrugging. "That map was drawn assuming the lake level was fixed. But Mr. Ashland owns the high water mark easement, and structurally, that wall is on his dirt." "Fix it," Venetia commanded, pointing a finger at Jim. "Fix your machine. It's wrong." "My machine uses satellites, ma'am," Jim said dryly. "It doesn't have an opinion." Venetia turned to me. Her eyes filled with a cold, pure hatred. "You think this is funny? You think you can use some clerical error to extort us?" "I don't want your money, Venetia," I said calmly. "I just want you off my lawn." She stared at me for a long moment, her chest heaving. Then she smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of someone who had decided to stop playing games and start destroying lives. "You want a war, Mr. Ashland?" she whispered. "Fine. You have one. But remember, you're one man in a rotting cabin. I have a legal team that costs more an hour than you make in a year. I will bury you so deep you'll need a map to find the sky." She turned on her heel and marched back down the hill, her security guards trailing behind her like confused puppies. Jim packed up his gear. He looked at me, shaking his head. "You poked the bear, son. That woman, she knows people. Powerful people." "I know," I said. "That's why I need those official survey results filed by 5 p.m. today." Jim nodded. "I'll file them. But watch your back." He drove away, leaving me alone on the ridge. I knew the retaliation would be swift. I checked my watch. 1 p.m. At 4 p.m. the power went out. I checked the breaker box. Nothing. I looked down the hill. The mansions were glowing with light. At 4:30 p.m. the water pressure dropped to 0. I walked out to the well pump. The lock had been cut. The main valve had been smashed with a sledgehammer. At 5 p.m., a black sedan rolled up the driveway. A man in a sharp gray suit got out. He didn't look like a lawyer. He looked like a shark in human skin. He handed me a thick envelope. "Courtesy of the HOA, he said, his voice smooth and oily. Cease and desist, order to vacate, and a notice of eminent domain proceedings. Eminent domain? I asked, taking the envelope. The HOA isn't the government. We've petitioned the township, he said, smiling. They've declared your property blighted and essential for community water management infrastructure. We're taking it for the public good. You have 72 hours to vacate. He got back in his car and drove off. I stood there in the fading light, holding the paperwork. No power, no water, and a legal threat that claimed they were going to steal my land for the greater good. They weren't just aggressive. They were fast. I went back into the cabin. It was getting cold. I lit the wood stove. I fired up the backup generator I had installed in the cellar the day I arrived. One of the many upgrades Venetia hadn't noticed. I sat at the table and opened the envelope. It was impressive. Terrifyingly expensive legal jargon designed to scare me into submission. I picked up my satellite phone. I made one call. Sutton, I said when the line connected. It's Mercer. It's started. Sutton Vance laughed on the other end of the line. It sounded like gravel crunching in a mixer. Did she bite? She bit, I said. She cut my utilities and served me with eminent domain papers. Eminent domain? Sutton cackled. Oh, that's adorable. She's trying to use the township council. Who's the council? Probably someone she owns, I said. I need you here, Sutton, and bring Pace. Pace is already in the van, Sutton said. We'll be there by morning. Mercer? Yeah? Don't kill anyone before we get there. This is going to be fun. I hung up. I watched the lights of the luxury homes below, reflecting on the dark water. My water. They thought they had cut me off. They thought I was sitting in the dark, cold and afraid. They didn't know I spent 5 years living in forward operating bases, where the only power we had was what we generated, and the only water we had was what we fought for. I wasn't afraid of the dark. The dark was where I did my best work. I slept in shifts that night, checking the perimeter every 2 hours. I expected vandalism. I expected intimidation. What I got was silence. But it was the heavy, pregnant silence of an ambush waiting for spring. At 8 a.m. the next morning, a beat-up RV rolled up my driveway. It was painted a matte black that absorbed the light. The side door slid open, and Sutton Vance stepped out. He looked like he slept in a shark tank. Sharp features, slicked-back hair, wearing a suit that was wrinkled but clearly cost 5 figures. He was followed by Rico Pacey, a forensic accountant who looked more like a mechanic, wearing coveralls and carrying a ruggedized laptop case. Nice shack, Sutton said, looking at the cabin. Smells like pine needles and litigation. Coffee's on, I said. We gathered around the table. I laid out the federal patent, the survey results, and the cease and desist order. Sutton picked up the cease and desist. He scanned it, his eyes darting back and forth. Then he chuckled. He tore the corner off the page and used it to pick his teeth. This isn't a legal document, Mercer, he said, tossing it onto the table. It's a confession letter written in legalese. Explain, I said. They're claiming imminent environmental hazard as the justification for the eminent domain, Sutton said. They cite a study done by Apex Environmental Solutions. Pace looked up from his laptop. Apex Environmental Solutions. The registered agent is Sterling Kessler, Venetia's husband. Conflict of interest, I said. Fraud, Sutton corrected. They're using a company they own to declare an emergency so they can seize your land to fix a problem they invented. It's a closed loop, it's clumsy, it's arrogant. It's working, I said. The Township Council is voting on it Tuesday. Tuesday is 3 days away, Sutton said. That gives us 72 hours to turn this from a property dispute into a federal racketeering case. Pace was typing furiously. I'm digging into the HOA financials, accessing the public filings. Mercer, you said they charge $5,000 a year for access? Yeah. There are 200 homes in the reserve, Pace muttered. That's $1 million a year in access fees alone, plus maintenance, plus fines. Where's the money going? Venetia drives a G-Wagon, I said, and her husband just bought a 40-foot cruiser. I'm not seeing that in the HOA expenditures, Pace said, frowning. I'm seeing massive payments to consulting firms and legal retainers. I need deeper access. I need their internal server. That's illegal, I said. Hacking is illegal, Pace said, grinning. Analyzing data that travels through the public airwaves on an unsecured Wi-Fi network because they're too cheap to buy enterprise-grade encryption. That's just being a good neighbor. Do it, Sutton said. Mercer, what's your play? I need to protect the asset, I said. If they think they can just seize the land, they'll try to physically occupy it. They'll send construction crews. They'll try to bulldoze the cabin. Let them try, Sutton said. If they touch a single board of this cabin before the court order is signed, it's criminal trespass and destruction of property. We need bait. I'm the bait, I said. Good. Pace, find the money. Mercer, fortify the position. I'm going to town to file a counterclaim and a request for emergency injunctive relief. I'm going to tie them up in so much red tape they'll need a machete to go to the bathroom. Sutton grabbed his briefcase and headed for the RV. Oh, and Mercer? Yeah? If Venetia comes back, be polite. Nothing scares a narcissist more than someone who isn't afraid of them. I spent the day turning the cabin into a fortress. I reinforced the doors. I boarded up the ground floor windows from the inside. I set up the trail cams, military-grade motion sensors that sent real-time video to my cloud server. I placed them in the trees, hidden in birdhouses, buried in the brush. I wanted every angle covered. If they stepped foot on my land, I wanted it in 4K resolution. Around noon, I saw a drone buzzing over my property. Not mine, theirs. It hovered over the cabin, then flew down to the lakeshore, filming the shoreline. I waved at it. It buzzed angrily and flew back toward Venetia's house. At 2 p.m., I walked down to the lake. The water level was lower than usual. We had had a dry winter. I looked at the massive HOA dock. It was resting heavily on the pylons. I climbed into my small aluminum fishing boat, the one Silas used to use, and rowed out to the pylon I had inspected earlier. Up close, the damage was worse than I thought. The concrete was spalling. Rebar was exposed and rusting. The entire structure was listing about 3 degrees to the port side. If they held their summer gala on this dock next weekend with 200 people, weight distribution would be critical. I took photos, detailed, time-stamped photos. Hey! I looked up. A man was standing on the HOA dock. He was big, wearing a tight t-shirt that struggled to contain his biceps. He had a buzz cut and the aggressive posture of a bouncer. "Get away from the dock!" he yelled. "Private property." "I'm in the water," I said, resting on my oars. "Navigable waterway, federal jurisdiction." "I don't care about jurisdiction," he growled. "Mrs. Kessler said to keep you away. You touch this dock, and I'll break those oars over your head." "That's a threat," I said calmly, "and I'm recording it." I pointed to the body cam clipped to my vest. He hesitated. He looked back toward the clubhouse. Venetia was watching from the balcony, a glass of wine in her hand. She gave a small nod. The man unclipped a radio from his belt. "He's refusing to leave." Suddenly, the sound of a high-powered engine roared to life. A sleek speedboat shot out from the marina, heading straight for my small aluminum craft. It was Sterling Kessler, Venetia's husband. He was at the wheel, laughing. He aimed the boat directly at me, swerving at the last second to send a massive wake crashing over the side of my boat. Water flooded in. The boat rocked violently, nearly capsizing. I grabbed the gunnels, bracing myself. Sterling circled back, the engine screaming. He did it again and again. "Having fun, neighbor?" he shouted over the roar of the engine. "Maybe you should learn to swim." He was trying to sink me, or at least swamp me. I didn't panic. I started the small outboard motor on my boat and turned into the wake, riding the waves. I pulled out my phone and zoomed in on Sterling's face. He was drunk. I could see the red flush of his skin, the sloppy coordination. "That's assault with a deadly weapon," I muttered to myself, "and operating a vessel under the influence." I headed back to my shoreline, taking on water but staying afloat. Sterling did one last victory lap, spraying a wall of water over me before speeding back to his private dock. I dragged my boat onto the shore. I was soaked, freezing. Venetia was still on the balcony. She raised her wine glass in a mock toast. They thought this was a game. They thought they could bully me off the water. I walked up the hill to the cabin, water dripping from my clothes. Pace was waiting for me. "You okay?" he asked, looking at my soaked state. "I'm fine," I said. "Did you get it?" "Get what?" "The video. From the drone I put up before I went down there." Pace grinned. "Crystal clear. We got him trying to ram you. We got Venetia giving the order. And we got the timestamps." "Good," I said, peeling off my wet shirt. "Add it to the pile. What did you find in the financials?" Pace's face went serious. "Mercer, it's worse than we thought. They aren't just skimming off the top. They're broke." "Broke?" "Insolvent. The HOA reserves are empty. They spent it all on landscaping, which was actually a shell company for Sterling's gambling debts. But here's the kicker." He turned the laptop screen toward me. "They have a contract pending, a massive one. They are selling the water rights to a bottling corporation, Clear Springs Global." "They can't sell what they don't own," I said. "They promised Clear Springs guaranteed exclusive access," Pace said, "for $50 million. The deal closes next Friday, but it's contingent on them securing the complete watershed control." "That's why they need my land," I realized. "Without my deed, they can't deliver the watershed. The deal implodes." "And if the deal implodes," Pace said, "the Kesslers go to prison for fraud, and they lose everything. They're leveraged to the hilt. This isn't just about greed anymore, Mercer. It's about survival." I looked at the screen. $50 million. That explained everything. The desperation, the speed, the recklessness. "They're all in," I said. "Yeah," Pace said, "and tonight, they're going to try to take you out of the equation." "How do you know?" "Because," Pace pointed to the screen again, "I just intercepted an email from Venetia to her security chief. Subject line, asset removal. Time, tonight, 0200. "Asset removal," I repeated. "That's me. That's you." I looked at the clock. It was 6 p.m. 8 hours until 0200. "Call Sutton," I said. "Tell him to get the sheriff on standby, but tell him not to come until I signal." "You're going to let them come?" Pace asked. "I'm going to welcome them," I said. I went to the closet and pulled out a black hard case. I opened it. Inside were night vision goggles and a high-powered spotlight. Pace, get the cameras ready. We're going to make a movie. The sun set, plunging the ridge into darkness. The cabin was silent. I sat in the dark, watching the monitors. At 1:55 a.m., the motion sensors at the bottom of the driveway tripped. 3 figures, dressed in black, carrying crowbars and what looked like incendiary devices. They moved silently up the gravel road. I watched them on the screen. "Here we go," I whispered. I didn't reach for a weapon. I reached for the switch that controlled the floodlights I had rigged in the trees. They crept closer. They reached the porch. One of them pulled out a bottle of gasoline. I waited until he unscrewed the cap. Then I flipped the switch. 12,000 lumens of LED light exploded into existence, turning the pitch-black night into a blinding white supernova. The 3 figures on my porch froze like deer in headlights, their hands raised instinctively to shield their eyes. The one with the gasoline bottle dropped it. The glass shattered on the stone steps, the smell of raw fuel instantly saturating the air. I didn't yell. I didn't wave a weapon. I simply spoke into the microphone of the PA system I had wired into the external speakers. "Smile, gentlemen. You're live streaming to the cloud." Panic is a funny thing. It overrides logic faster than a short circuit. They didn't check to see if I was bluffing. They didn't try to finish the job. They scrambled, tripping over each other, sliding on the loose gravel as they sprinted back toward the tree line. One of them lost his mask in the chaos. Even in the harsh glare of the floodlights, the face was unmistakable. It was the bouncer from the dock, the one Venetia employed for community safety. I watched them disappear into the woods, the sound of their crashing retreat fading into the silence of the ridge. I didn't chase them. I didn't call the sheriff. Not yet. Pace turned from the monitors, his face illuminated by the blue glow of the screen. "We got it all. 4K resolution, including the face and the license plate of the truck waiting down the road." "Sterling's truck?" I asked. "Registered to Apex Environmental," Pace confirmed. "Venetia's shell company." "Good," I said, turning off the floodlights and plunging the ridge back into darkness. "Let them run. Let them think they got away with it. Fear makes people careless." The next morning, the sun rose over Mirror Lake as if nothing had happened. The water was calm, glass-like, reflecting the false tranquility of the exclusive community below. But inside the cabin, the atmosphere was electric. Sutton was on the phone, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. Pace was compiling the final dossier. I was cleaning the soot from the porch steps, the smell of gasoline still faint in the wood. "The Township Council meeting is tonight," Sutton said, hanging up. Venetia pushed the vote up. "She's claiming emergency exigent circumstances due to an attempted environmental sabotage at your cabin last night." I stopped scrubbing. "She's blaming me for the arson attempt on my own house?" "She's spinning it," Sutton said, admiring the audacity. "She's claiming you were storing unstable chemicals that leaked, proving you're a hazard. She wants the eminent domain order signed by 5 p.m. "She's terrified," I said. "The Clear Springs deal must be hanging by a thread." "It is," Pace chimed in. "I tracked the wire transfers. She needs to show clear title to the water rights by Friday, or the escrow dissolves. She's out of time." I stood up. "Then let's go help her run out the clock." I didn't wear my work boots to the town hall. I wore the charcoal suit I usually reserved for meetings with the Joint Chiefs. I shaved. I looked every inch the military officer I used to be, not the mountain hermit Venetia wanted to paint me as. The town hall was packed. Venetia had rallied the troops, nervous homeowners worried about their property values, board members she had bullied into submission, and the entire legal team of the Homeowners Association. She stood at the podium, looking impeccable in her signature light blue suit, though the strain was showing around her eyes. She was holding up grainy photos of my cabin. "This man is a danger to himself and this community," she proclaimed, her voice trembling with manufactured outrage. "Last night, hazardous materials stored on his property nearly ignited a wildfire that could have consumed the reserve. We cannot wait for due process. We need to seize control of the watershed now, before he destroys us all." The council members looked concerned. The chairman, a man named Henderson, who I knew played golf with Sterling Kessler every Sunday, leaned into his microphone. "Given the severity of the threat, the council is inclined to grant the emergency order. Point of order, Mr. Chairman." My voice wasn't loud, but it projected to the back of the room without a microphone. I walked down the center aisle, Sutton and Pace flanking me like executive bodyguards. Venetia froze. "You have no standing here. This is a closed session for residents." "I am a resident," I said, reaching the front of the room. "And I am the owner of the property you are discussing. I believe I have the right to rebut the accusations of, what was it, environmental sabotage?" "Sit down, Mr. Ashland," Henderson said, banging his gavel. "We have seen the reports." "You've seen her reports," I said, plugging my phone into the presentation console on the clerk's desk before anyone could stop me. "Now you're going to see the truth." The massive screen behind the council bench flickered. The video from last night played. The timestamp was clearly visible. The three men creeping up the stairs, the gasoline bottle, the bouncer's face as the lights hit him. The frantic retreat to the truck with Apex Environmental stenciled on the door. The room went dead silent. You could hear the hum of the projector fan. "Holy cow," someone whispered in the back row. "That's not chemicals leaking," I said, pointing to the screen. "That is attempted arson, conducted by employees of the HOA president, utilizing a vehicle registered to her husband's company." Venetia gripped the podium, her knuckles white. This is a deep fake. Technology these days. He fabricated it." "Did I also fabricate this?" I clicked the remote. The screen changed. It was now displaying a bank ledger. "This is the operating account for the HOA," I explained. "Note the transfers. $50,000 to Kessler Consulting, $20,000 to Blue Water Legal, all shell companies, all funneling money into Venetia's personal accounts to pay for the option fees on the surrounding land." The crowd began to murmur. The murmur grew into a roar. "That's our maintenance money," a woman shouted. "And finally," I said, ignoring the chaos rising behind me, "the reason why." I clicked the remote one last time. The contract with Clear Springs Global appeared. The $50 million figure was highlighted in yellow. "She isn't trying to save the lake," I said, turning to face the audience. "She's trying to sell it. She's trying to sell the water from under your docks to a bottling plant. Once this deal signs, you won't have a private lake. You'll have an industrial reservoir." Pandemonium. Henderson was banging his gavel, but nobody was listening. Homeowners were standing up, shouting at Venetia. The HOA board members were looking at each other with wide, terrified eyes, realizing they were accomplices to a massive fraud. Venetia looked like a cornered rat. She pointed a shaking finger at me. "Arrest him! He hacked our private records! Sheriff! Sheriff!" The sheriff, a heavy-set man who had been leaning against the back wall, pushed himself off the plaster. He walked down the aisle. He walked right past me. He stopped in front of Venetia. "Mrs. Kessler," he said slowly, "I think we need to have a conversation about that video." Venetia's face crumpled. She looked at Henderson, but the chairman was suddenly very interested in his paperwork. "This isn't over," she hissed at me, grabbing her purse. "You think a few slides scare me? I own this town." She pushed past the sheriff and stormed out the side door. I didn't follow her. I knew where she was going. "Sutton," I said. "Call the Corps." "Way ahead of you," Sutton said. I drove back to the cabin. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a cold, hard focus. Venetia wasn't done. A narcissist never accepts defeat. They just escalate until they self-destruct. At dawn, I heard heavy machinery. I walked out to the porch. Down at the lakeshore, a bulldozer was tearing through the trees on the HOA land, heading straight for the earthen dam that controlled the lake's outflow. Venetia was standing on the hood of her G-Wagon, screaming instructions to the operator. Sterling was there too, holding a rifle. They were going to breach the dam. If they couldn't own the water, they were going to drain it. If they lowered the lake level, they could claim the exposed land was new territory, bypassing my deed. It was insane. It was ecological suicide. I grabbed my keys and drove down the hill. I parked my truck across the access road, blocking the bulldozer's path. I stepped out, unarmed. "Turn it off!" I yelled over the roar of the diesel engine. Sterling raised the rifle. "Get out of the way, Ashland! You're trespassing!" "I'm on my easement," I shouted back, "and you're about to commit a federal crime." "Do it!" Venetia shrieked at the operator. "Push his truck into the lake!" The bulldozer revved, black smoke pouring from the stack. The operator hesitated, looking from Venetia to me. "Sterling, put the gun down," I said, my voice calm. "It's over." "It's over when I say it is," Sterling yelled. "We built this place. We deserve this." "You stole it," I said, "and now the bill is due." Sirens wailed in the distance. Not the local sheriff. These were different sirens, sharper, more urgent. A convoy of black SUVs tore down the main road, followed by a heavy truck with U.S. Army Corps of Engineers emblazoned on the side. They skidded to a halt at the edge of the property. Tactical teams spilled out. Vests marked FBI and EPA. A man in a windbreaker stepped forward, holding a megaphone. "Federal agents, shut down the equipment immediately. Drop the weapon." Sterling looked at the feds. He looked at Venetia. He looked at the rifle in his hands. For a second, I thought he was going to do something stupid. Then his shoulders sagged. He dropped the rifle in the dirt. The bulldozer engine died. The silence that rushed back into the valley was deafening. Venetia didn't surrender. She stood on the hood of her car, her hair wild, her face a mask of disbelief. "You have no authority here," she screamed at the FBI agents. "I am the president of the association. This is private property." The lead agent walked up to her car. He didn't look angry. He looked bored. "Venetia Thorne Kessler," he said. "You are under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, attempted arson, and violation of the Clean Water Act. Get down from the vehicle." "This is nonsense," she spat. "My husband knows the governor." "Your husband is under arrest too, ma'am," the agent said, gesturing to where two officers were already cuffing Sterling. They pulled her down. She kicked and screamed, her dignity evaporating along with her empire. They marched her past me. She stopped, breathing hard, staring at me with venomous eyes. "You're nobody," she whispered. "You're just a mechanic." "I'm the owner," I said. They put her in the back of the SUV. The door slammed shut with a finality that echoed across the water. The Army Corps engineers were already inspecting the dam, taking measurements, ensuring the integrity of the structure. The lead engineer walked over to me. "Mr. Ashland?" he asked. "Colonel Vance sent us. We've verified your patent. This waterway is under federal protection. And he looked over at the massive clubhouse dock. That structure is condemned. It's built on unstable silt without a permit. It's coming down. I looked at the dock, the symbol of Venetia's power. Do what you have to do, I said. The fallout was swift and brutal. The HOA was dissolved by emergency court order. The forensic audit revealed that Venetia had drained the accounts dry. The residents were furious, but the anger was directed where it belonged. The Clear Springs deal collapsed the moment the arrest made the news. The Kessler family assets were frozen, then seized to pay restitution. They lost everything. The mansions, the boats, the reputation. Sterling took a plea deal, turning on Venetia to save himself. He got 5 years. Venetia refused to plead. She went to trial, convinced she could talk her way out of it. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. She got 15 years in federal prison. I didn't go to the sentencing. I was busy. 6 months later, I stood on the porch of my cabin. It looks different now. I had replaced the roof, stained the wood, and cleared the brush. It didn't look like a shack anymore. It looked like a home. Below, the lake was quiet. The illegal docks were gone. The private property signs had been torn down. I had placed the water rights into a land trust, a permanent conservation easement that guaranteed public access to the lake for fishing and swimming forever. No development, no bottling plants, no fees. I saw a family down by the shore, a father teaching his daughter how to cast a fishing line. They weren't residents of the reserve. They were just locals, people who had been locked out of their own heritage for 20 years. The little girl laughed as she reeled in a sunfish. I smiled, taking a sip of coffee. They thought power came from a clipboard and a title. They forgot that real power comes from the truth, the land, and the patience to let a fool hang themselves. I walked back inside. The lockbox was sitting on the table, open. I took the 1887 patent and placed it in a frame on the wall. It wasn't a weapon anymore. It was just a piece of paper. But it was the piece of paper that had saved the water. If this story fired you up, please like, subscribe, and hit that thanks button to support more justice. See you in the next one.
Thanks for staying to the end. Don't forget to like and subscribe to IS Stories.